$4,000. That was the figure my brother Ethan had scribbled on the back of a napkin, mind you, during a hurried lunch at a diner miles away from the plot of land he was trying to steal from me. $4,000 for the 20 acres that sat on the forgotten edge of town, the piece of inherited history that had been in our family for over a century. It was insulting, beyond insulting. It was a slap in the face delivered with his signature smug grin. "Look, Mark," he'd said, leaning across the sticky laminate table, his voice low and oiled with false concern. "I'm doing you a favor. It's liability, pure and simple. You can't afford the taxes, it's mostly marsh, and everyone knows the zoning board will never let you develop on it. It's a dead asset. Take the $4,000, pay off some debt, and walk away clean, before the county seizes it for back taxes." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell him where he could shove his $4,000, napkin and all. But the truth was, his words carried the stinging weight of reality. For the last 5 years, that patch of woods and swamp, dubbed Silas Folly by my mother, had been nothing but a drain. I'd inherited it when Grandpa passed, a forgotten relic of great-great-grandpa Silas's pioneering spirit. Silas was always the black sheep, the dreamer who chased whispers and secrets, the one who left home seeking something grander than cornfields and quiet living, only to seemingly settle for this unremarkable piece of low-lying ground. The taxes were indeed a burden, a growing, gnawing problem that kept me up at night. Ethan knew this. He always knew exactly where to press to inflict maximum financial pain, couching his predatory instincts in the language of brotherly assistance. $4,000, Ethan? You just sold that duplex last month for $350,000, and you want to offer me $4,000 for land that abuts the new industrial park boundary line? I kept my voice level, the effort costing me a visible swallow. I watched his eyes flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch that told me everything. He was hiding something. Ethan never moved unless the leverage was overwhelmingly in his favor. If he was offering me a quick, clean exit, it meant the land was worth a whole lot more than he was letting on. But what? It wasn't the industrial park. Those plans had been public for months, and the park was moving north, not south toward Silas's Folly. The land was quiet, overgrown, accessible only by a crumbling dirt track, and certainly looked like nothing more than a mosquito breeding ground waiting for its annual property assessment. He leaned back, feigning exasperation. "Mark, be realistic. The industrial park is still a mile out. That boundary line is meaningless noise. Look, I'm the only person who will even touch this plot. I've done the research. The soil is terrible. You need expensive remediation just to build a shed. I'm thinking long-term investment here. Something I might hold for 20 years, hoping the city expands. You need cash now. This is a fair, hassle-free cash offer. Take it or leave it. I have a closing agent ready by Friday." The finality in his tone was meant to intimidate, to rush me into a catastrophic decision. That rush was the biggest red flag. Why the urgency? Why Friday? I pushed my plate away, the half-eaten sandwich suddenly tasting like ash. "I appreciate the offer, Ethan, but I'm not signing anything until I look through the original paperwork. Not the copies the lawyer sent me, but the actual original documents. Grandpa's will, Silas's deed. Everything." Ethan's face went pale, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. The confidence in his eyes wavered, replaced by a momentary panic he quickly masked with a forced, booming laugh. "The original paperwork? Are you serious? Those things are likely mulch by now. It's all filed electronically, Mark. The copies are legally binding. What good is some ancient parchment going to do you?" "It's the principle," I lied smoothly, getting up. "It's family history. I want to see the original grant deed, the one Silas signed. Give me until next week. Friday is out." I left him sitting there, the napkin crumpled beside his water glass, the picture of poorly concealed frustration. The moment I stepped out of the diner and into the muggy afternoon air, my heart started to pound. I had given myself a reprieve, but I was gambling on a hunch, a feeling born entirely of my deep distrust of my own brother. I drove straight to the musty storage unit where I kept the relics of the family estate. It was a place I dreaded, filled with moth-eaten furniture, boxes of forgotten photo albums, and the heavy air of things long since laid to rest. Digging through the largest unlabeled moving box, Beneath a pile of brittle velvet curtains and a set of tarnished silver, I finally found the documents. They weren't in a nice filing cabinet. They were bundled haphazardly, tied with a decaying piece of twine. The modern copies were on top, neat and legible, but underneath, protected by a layer of acid-free paper, was the original grant deed from 1904. It was massive, thick parchment, yellowed and fragile, covered in elegant looping script. The ink had faded to a sepia tone, and the margins were full of sprawling, barely legible notations. Handwritten additions and revisions made by Silas himself, seemingly dismissed as irrelevant scrawls by every lawyer who had handled the estate since. I spent 3 hours cross-referencing the property lines, checking the legal jargon, my fingers growing dusty and smelling faintly of mildew and old paper. The description of the land was precise, but suddenly, one line, written in the cramped, spidery hand of Silas, caught my eye. A line that had been inexplicably omitted from the typed modern abstract, perhaps deemed too subjective or too eccentric to be official. It was a cryptic footnote added right beneath the surveyor's mark, and it didn't use legal terms like meets and bounds or easements. It used words like a secret, a winding path, a granite cap, and beneath them, a reference to a long-forgotten geological survey map. But the final, most damning phrase, scribbled in bold, dark ink that seemed to resist the passage of time, was the one that made my breath catch in my throat, the one that explained Ethan's urgency and his ridiculously low offer. He wasn't buying swampland, he was buying a lie. The note read, "This plot not valuable for surface growth, but the vein runs deep. Remember the old man's words, the true worth is found where the water meets the sulfur, below the surface of the first claim." And etched beside that final, ominous sentence, Silas had drawn a crude, looping diagram and clearly labeled a single circular spot on the property boundary with 2 terrifying, electrifying words. Silas, strike. The 2 words, Silas, strike, burned into my mind with the scorching heat of a brand. I sat in the musty storage unit, the single bare bulb casting long, flickering shadows, staring at that antique document. A strike in the context of a 1904 land deed, especially from a man known to chase mineral whispers, couldn't mean anything other than a discovery, a big one. The whole financial landscape of my life, which moments before had looked like a desolate, parched plain, suddenly felt like a massive, unexplored cavern waiting for the light. I felt a surge of exhilaration mixed with a sickening wave of paranoia. Ethan knew, or at the very least, Ethan suspected. That aggressive $4,000 offer wasn't about saving me from tax debt. It was about stealing a fortune while keeping my hands clean of the dirty work. My research started immediately, fueled by cheap coffee and adrenaline. I couldn't use my personal computer or public library archives. The trail had to be invisible. I drove an hour to a university library in the next county, burying myself in the local history and geology section, focusing on the region around Silas's Folly. My initial search was broad: local mining history, early 20th century prospecting, and, most importantly, the geological survey records. It was tedious, eye-straining work, sifting through microfilm and brittle-bound volumes that smelled of dust and forgotten ambition. I learned that the entire eastern corner of the county had experienced a brief, feverish gold rush in the late 1890s, only for the excitement to fizzle out spectacularly. The main company, the Mid-Atlantic Mining Syndicate, declared bankruptcy in 1903 after failing to hit a commercially viable vein on their primary claim, selling off all their marginal land cheap. Then I found Silas. Not Mark Silas, but an entry in a 1905 Historical Society newsletter, a brief mention of a certain S. Hawthorne, a disgruntled prospector who had worked for the failed syndicate. The description of the man's bitterness, his eccentric conviction that the company had been digging in the wrong place, and his subsequent decision to purchase a low-lying parcel deemed worthless by the syndicate's geologists matched the character of my great-great-grandfather perfectly. Silas hadn't just bought land to farm. He had bought the syndicate's forgotten failure. He had bought their leftovers, convinced the real prize lay elsewhere. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying speed. Silas's note on the deed wasn't random folklore, it was geology. The true worth is found where the water meets the sulfur, below the surface of the first claim. The first claim was the syndicate's failed dig site, which was adjacent to our 20 acres. Water meets the sulfur pointed directly to the geological conditions of our land. The swampy, marshy area near the small, naturally occurring hot spring that fed the swamp. The proximity of water and sulfur, pyrite often called fool's gold, but crucially, often an indicator mineral for actual gold deposits, meant one thing. Silas had been looking for a specific quartz vein laced with gold, known to form near hydrothermal vents. He wasn't after surface gold, he was after a deep, rich mother lode. He hadn't just settled for a piece of swamp, he had shrewdly bought the mineral rights to a location he believed was loaded. I spent the next 48 hours compiling a crude map, triangulating the description on the deed with the geological survey maps. I could pinpoint the probable location of Silas' strike. It lay deep within the marshiest, most inaccessible part of the property, the very part Ethan had derided as worthless, tax-draining liability. That afternoon, I borrowed a rugged, beat-up old SUV from a friend, telling him I was going camping. I packed a shovel, a small pickaxe, a headlamp, and a cheap compass. Absolute stealth was paramount. I decided to make my move just before dawn the next day, when the world, and hopefully Ethan, would be asleep. The land was even more desolate than I remembered. I parked the SUV a quarter-mile down the dirt track, covering it loosely with pine branches. Navigating the 20 acres in the pre-dawn gloom was a miserable, humid ordeal. The ground sucked at my boots. The air was thick with mist, and the mosquitoes were relentless. Using the compass and pacing out the measurements from Silas's crude diagram, I finally arrived at a small, elevated patch of ground bordered by the stagnant swamp water. This was the spot where, according to the map, the granite cap should be. At first, I saw nothing but thick, interwoven briars and dense undergrowth. Disappointment threatened to crush me. Had I misread the map? Was Silas just a delusional old man after all? I started hacking at the brush with the shovel, clearing a 3-foot radius. It took 20 grueling minutes, my shirt soaked with sweat and my arms scratched raw. And then I hit something solid. Not rock, but a flat manufactured surface. I dropped to my knees, scraping away the remaining mud and decaying leaves. What emerged was a thick, circular slab of fieldstone. Not granite, but a dense, unnatural conglomerate of rock cemented together. It was deliberately concealed. It was the cap. The cap was about 3 feet in diameter, slightly sunk into the earth. There was a barely visible seam along the edge, indicating it could be lifted or removed. I jammed the pickaxe into the seam and pried with all my strength. It moved with a sickening grinding noise, revealing a shallow void underneath. Inside, nestled beneath the cap, wasn't a gaping mine shaft. Not yet. It was a small, dry, brick-lined pit, and lying on the clean brick floor, next to a rusted antique miner's lamp that had long since decayed, was a rock sample. It was a piece of white, crystalline quartz, about the size of my fist, speckled with dark veins. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The moment the headlamp beam hit the rock directly, a dozen tiny, shimmering pinpricks of light flashed back at me. They weren't just reflective, they were golden. Real, unmistakable, heavy gold embedded deep within the quartz. I quickly replaced the cap, covering it with leaves and brush, my mind reeling. I had proof. Undeniable proof. I didn't have $4,000 worth of swamp, I had a literal gold mine. I scrambled away from the marsh, adrenaline overriding the exhaustion. But as I reached the main dirt track, I heard the faint, metallic click of a camera shutter. I froze, crouching behind a thick oak. Peeking out, I saw a sedan, a black, rental-looking sedan, pulling away quickly from the spot where I had hidden the SUV. The car was accelerating toward the main road, but not before I caught a glimpse of the driver. It wasn't Ethan. It was a hired man, sharp-suited, holding a professional camera. They had been watching me. They had pictures. My secret wasn't mine anymore. Someone else, someone working for Ethan, knew I was digging. The stakes had just gone from financial dispute to something far more dangerous. The dust from the black sedan still hung in the humid air as I sped away from Silas's Folly, the small, glittering quartz sample tucked deep into my jeans pocket. The click of that camera shutter echoed in my skull like a gunshot. I was no longer an unwitting victim of an insulting lowball offer. I was a target. Ethan knew I had gone out to the land, and knowing Ethan, he had probably known the exact time I would be there. He wasn't operating on a hunch anymore. He was operating with surveillance and intelligence. The sudden, terrifying realization was this: Ethan wasn't worried about me discovering a gold mine. He was worried about me securing it. He needed that deed signed before I could do anything with the knowledge I now possessed. I didn't go home. Home felt contaminated, too easily monitored. I drove to a cheap, anonymous motel 20 miles away, the kind of place where people only pay in cash and ask no questions. I secured the quartz sample and the old grant deed, the single most valuable piece of paper in my possession, in the motel's rusty, bolted-down safe. My next move had to be calculated, subtle, and decisive. I had to confront Ethan, but I couldn't expose my hand. I needed to gauge the depth of his knowledge and, more importantly, figure out who the hired man worked for. I sent Ethan a text message. "Let's talk. That $4,000 is a joke. I'll meet you at the old coffee spot tomorrow morning. Come alone." The message was designed to sound greedy and combative, exactly what he would expect from his naive, financially struggling little brother. He responded instantly, "Fine. Be there at 8 a.m. And bring the copies of the deed so we can finally close this." His haste was palpable, a desperate, hungry energy radiating from the screen. He was convinced he had me backed into a corner, thinking my visit to the land was the result of a panicked, last-ditch effort to assess the worthless property. The next morning, I met him at the diner, this time choosing a corner booth well away from the windows. I wore a small, discreet voice recorder taped to my chest, a precaution I sincerely hoped I wouldn't need. Ethan arrived in a suit I knew cost more than my car, his face carefully composed into an expression of patient, weary superiority. "Look, Mark, I appreciate you finally coming to your senses," he began, not bothering with pleasantries. He placed a thick, sealed envelope on the table, a certified check for $50,000. My heart momentarily stuttered at the sight of the zeros. $50,000. It was a massive leap from $4K, an undeniable confirmation that the land was worth a colossal amount more. "I told you that offer was low," he continued, maintaining his facade of reluctant generosity. "I'm taking a huge risk here, but I'm bumping it up to $50,000, non-negotiable. I need you to sign the sales agreement today. I have a buyer, a new buyer, who needs the paperwork finalized by the end of the week." I scoffed, trying to channel the indignation I genuinely felt. $50,000? You've got to be joking, Ethan. You think I'm stupid? You offered me $4,000, then I tell you I'm checking the paperwork and suddenly the price jumps 12-fold? What changed? Did the industrial park suddenly decide they needed 20 acres of marshland overnight? Ethan's carefully constructed composure finally fractured. He didn't blink. He stared at me, his eyes cold and hard. "Stop digging, Mark. I am giving you enough money to disappear, settle your debt, and move on. The industrial park is irrelevant. But yes, something changed, or rather, someone got impatient. And that someone is not someone you want to keep waiting." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that was barely audible over the clatter of plates. "You want to know how I knew to offer you $4,000 in the first place? It wasn't an appraisal. It was information. Information I was told to act on, quickly and quietly before you realized what you owned." He took a slow sip of his black coffee, watching my reaction. "A couple of months ago, I was approached by a firm, a high-end, extremely connected investment group. They weren't interested in the land for development. They were interested in the mineral rights tied to the original grant. Not just any mineral rights, either. They mentioned the old Mid-Atlantic Syndicate and a specific forgotten secondary claim filed by a guy named Silas. They had been tracking the property ownership for years, waiting for it to pass to someone vulnerable, like you. Their initial order to me was simple. Make a nuisance offer, low enough that he signs it just to stop the headaches. That was the $4,000. It was a test, and you failed it by not taking it immediately." My blood ran cold. Ethan wasn't the main villain. He was just a low-level mercenary who had sniffed out an opportunity for a quick commission. Who are they, Ethan? This group? Give me a name. His composure vanished, replaced by genuine fear. He glanced nervously around the diner. You don't want to know. Trust me. They are huge, they have long memories, and they view this land as something that has belonged to them for 100 years, just waiting to be reclaimed. They think Silas stole the claim when the syndicate went under. They didn't find the gold, Silas did, and they want it back, along with the deed that proves the claim belongs to the owner of record. My $50,000 offer isn't from me, Mark. It's their desperation talking, because they know you've started to poke around. They know you went to the property. They told me that if I don't secure the land by Friday, they will cut me out and deal with the problem themselves. And trust me, Mark, their definition of deal with the problem is a lot darker than legal arbitration. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly tight. Take the money, Mark. You're playing a game you can't win. You found the gold, but they own the game board. If you try to hold onto that deed, if you try to exploit that discovery, they won't just sue you for everything you have. They will ensure you have nothing left to sue with. This isn't just about money anymore. This is about a forgotten century-old claim, and the powerful people who are willing to erase anything that gets in the way of the multi-million-dollar truth. I left Ethan sitting in the diner, the $50,000 check abandoned on the table beside his untouched coffee. The money had lost all its appeal. It was tainted, a meager bribe offered by a scared intermediary. The investment group, the shadow entity that considered itself the rightful owner of Silas's secrets, was playing a deadly game, and Ethan had just confirmed I was the piece they were willing to sacrifice. Their fear wasn't that I would discover the gold, it was that I would legitimize the claim before they could steal it back. The gold mine wasn't just a financial asset. It was a century-old property dispute disguised as a simple land sale. My immediate thought was preservation. The quartz sample was proof of the gold, but the original grant deed was the weapon. It contained the crucial geological coordinates and, more importantly, Silas's damning handwritten notes. I needed to know if Silas, the paranoid prospector who knew he was sitting on a secret worth millions, had taken steps to protect his descendants from this exact scenario. He hadn't just scribbled notes in the margins. He must have left a final, definitive instruction set. Back in the anonymous motel room, the heavy parchment spread out under the glare of the lamp. I looked at the deed with fresh eyes, no longer searching for geological markers, but for intentional misdirections. I ran my fingers along every fold and crease, checking the paper for watermarks or false linings. I noticed a faint, almost imperceptible indent in the paper, right next to the year of the grant, 1904. It wasn't a smudge or a wrinkle. It was a tiny, precisely made pinprick, clearly made by a compass point or a thick sewing needle. Following the line of the deed's border, I found another pinprick exactly 1 inch away, and another, and another. Silas hadn't used a cipher. He had used a grid. The sequence of pinpricks marked specific letters on the legal description of the land. Starting with the first prick and counting the letters in the legal text, I began to extract a phrase. It was agonizingly slow work, requiring a magnifying glass and intense focus, but as I wrote down the scattered letters, they coalesced into a meaningful, if cryptic, message. The key rests where the first light fails. Box 38, Old Town Bank. The Old Town Bank. I vaguely remembered that name from my research into the Mid-Atlantic Syndicate. It was the bank that had handled the syndicate's initial, doomed payroll. It closed down decades ago, eventually merging with a larger regional institution. This was exactly the kind of dusty, forgotten repository Silas would have chosen. A place where paper trails disappeared, but physical evidence might survive. It was a significant risk to travel to the city center, knowing Ethan's hired surveillance team was likely tracking my movements via my phone or car. I took every precaution: a burner phone, cash for transport, and a detour involving 3 different bus lines just to lose any possible tail. I found the former Old Town Bank building. It was now a trendy gallery, but the original vault, a massive circular steel door, was preserved in the back as a novelty. The gallery manager confirmed that the large corporate bank that had swallowed Old Town still managed the records and any long-term safe deposit contents that hadn't been claimed after the merger. Presenting the original 1904 deed, which surprisingly still had legal standing as proof of familial connection. I managed to convince the corporate archivist to check the records for Box 38, Account S. Hawthorne. The archivist, an older woman named Mrs. Peterson, who seemed delighted by the historical intrigue, returned 30 minutes later, pushing a massive wheeled cart. There it was, a dull gray metal box sealed with a century-old lead rivet. I signed the required affidavits, my hands shaking not from fear, but anticipation. Inside, carefully wrapped in oilskin, were several items. First, a small leather pouch containing 3 gold ingots. Not giant bricks, but small, heavy bars, clearly smelted and stamped with the date 1906, 2 years after Silas bought the land. This was undeniable, irrefutable proof of the strike. The gold alone was worth a small fortune, but it was the second item that changed everything. It was a professionally prepared trust agreement and mineral rights vesting deed, dated December 1st, 1906. The document was meticulously notarized. It stated that the mineral rights for Silas's Folly were to be placed in an untouchable trust, vesting ownership solely to the current, living descendant named Mark. My full first name was listed in the deed's original text, upon a specific condition. The claim must be formally filed with the county recorder's office before November 26th, the anniversary of the syndicate's official bankruptcy, or the trust would lapse. Silas had tied the claim's legality to the very date of his adversary's failure. He hadn't just found gold, he had built a legal fortress around it. I checked the date on my watch, my mind screaming. November 25th, it was 11:30 a.m. I had less than 24 hours. The investment group wasn't worried about me signing the land over to Ethan. They were worried about me realizing the November 26th deadline. If they could pressure me into signing the simple land deed before I filed the mineral rights vesting deed, the trust would expire, the land sale would go through, and the mineral rights would default entirely to the new owner, Ethan, and by extension, his powerful backers. They had been waiting for 119 years for this trust to lapse, only to have the current Mark accidentally stumble upon the key the day before the deadline. As I tucked the documents and the heavy gold ingots into my bag, Mrs. Peterson suddenly spoke, her voice flat and formal. "Mr. Hawthorne, you have a phone call. He said to tell you he knows you're late for a very important deadline." She handed me a cheap burner phone. I pressed it to my ear. The voice on the other end was cold, synthesized, and utterly devoid of emotion. "The trust is not your solution, Mark. It is your timer. We know you have the documents. The county recorder's office closes at 5 p.m. If you walk out of that gallery with those papers, you won't make it to the courthouse. You have no idea what it took for us to keep this secret for a century, and we will not let a single day ruin everything. Drop the bag and walk away now, or Friday won't be the only deadline you miss." The synthesized voice on the phone cut through the historical reverence of the gallery like ice. They knew. They knew about the trust, about the box, and about the deadline. The moment I walked out, I would be walking into an ambush. The 5 p.m. closure of the county recorder's office was the absolute, immovable deadline, and I was miles away in the city center. I had less than 5 hours to register a century-old document that would secure a multi-million-dollar gold mine. I didn't try to sneak out. Subtlety was now a luxury I couldn't afford. Grabbing the nearest fire extinguisher, I smashed the emergency glass, the shrill, deafening alarm instantly plunging the gallery into chaos. As panicked art lovers and gallery staff scrambled for the exits, I pushed past them, clinging to the heavy bag containing Silas's legacy. The chaos bought me 30 precious seconds. I didn't run towards the street where the black sedan would be waiting. I ran out the back, through the employee exit, into a narrow, filthy alleyway. I couldn't risk my friend's SUV, which was parked blocks away. I needed something fast, maneuverable, and utterly disposable. I spotted a courier bicycle, chained haphazardly to a drain pipe. A swift kick broke the chain's brittle lock, and I vaulted onto the seat, pedaling with the desperate, burning energy of a man running for his life and his fortune. The city traffic was a snarl of steel and frustration, but the bike allowed me to weave through it, cutting across sidewalks and through red lights, a frantic blur of purpose. As I barreled down a busy thoroughfare, I risked a glance over my shoulder. There it was, The ominous black sedan, now joined by an identical twin, attempting a high-speed, dangerous maneuver to box me in. They weren't trying to scare me. They were trying to stop me, permanently. They were only interested in the bag. I knew I couldn't outrun them, and I couldn't fight them alone. I needed a distraction, an internal enemy to create the necessary friction. I pulled the burner phone from my pocket and dialed Ethan. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight with raw fear. "Mark, where the hell are you? You were supposed to sign. They know you went to the bank. They're coming for me if you don't finalize this." I cut him off, my voice cold and accusatory. "They know about the trust, Ethan. The vesting deed. The one that means if I file it before the deadline, not only do I get the gold, but your powerful anonymous buyers lose all legal recourse for good." "How did they find out about the trust so quickly? You told them, didn't you? You told them I was looking for something more than just a regular land deed to save your own miserable skin." It was a lie, a calculated shot in the dark, but it hit the target. "No, I swear, Mark, I didn't. I only told them you were checking the old papers. I don't even know what that trust thing is. I just wanted the commission." He sputtered, the panic making his voice crack. "I don't believe you," I snapped, "but I'm giving you a chance to save yourself from their revenge. If I don't file this deed, they'll turn their attention to you for failing. You'll be the easy scapegoat. You need to create a massive diversion at the courthouse. Now, block the entrance, crash a car, I don't care. Just make sure the black sedans are looking at you and not me. I need 10 seconds to get through that door. If I file the deed, I win. And if I win, they can't touch me, and they might leave you alone. Fail, and you're theirs." I didn't wait for a response. I tossed the burner phone onto the roof of a passing bus. The courthouse came into view, a monolithic structure of white stone and granite, just 10 blocks away. The time was 4:40 p.m. The black sedans were driving dangerously close, forcing pedestrians to jump out of the way. I took a hard left into a pedestrianized area, a public square that was currently full of office workers enjoying the late afternoon sun. It was a risky move, but the crowds offered the only chance for cover. The sedans followed, one mounting the curb, scattering the public. I pedaled faster, pushing my legs to the point of collapse. That's when the lead car finally clipped my rear wheel. The bike went out from under me, sending me tumbling across the paved square, the heavy bag skidding a few feet away. I scrambled for it, spitting blood and grit. 2 men in identical charcoal suits, the goons from the surveillance team, boiled out of the cars, their faces set in hard, brutal lines. They weren't carrying guns, but they didn't need them. They were big, trained, and focused only on the bag. "Drop it, Hawthorne. This is your only warning," one of them barked. I clutched the bag to my chest. My legs were screaming, and I knew I couldn't outrun them. Thinking fast, I reached inside and pulled out one of Silas's gold ingots. It was heavy, dense, and cold. I didn't throw it at them. I hurled it straight and hard into the windshield of the nearest black sedan. The sound of the impact was a deafening crystalline smash, spiderwebbing the glass instantly and causing the driver to slam on the brakes, swerving the second car to avoid a collision. The moment of chaos was brief, but it was enough. I made a break for it, sprinting toward the courthouse entrance, which was still 50 yards away. The 2 goons were right on my heels. I could hear their heavy breathing, the pounding of their expensive shoes on the pavement. I was flagging, my side stitching with pain. Then, a miracle, twisted by self-interest. A beat-up, dark green pickup truck, accelerating far too fast for the pedestrian zone, screamed around the corner, cutting directly in front of the 2 pursuing men. It wasn't a distraction. It was an obstruction. The truck slammed on its brakes, stalling out right in their path, creating an instantaneous, unavoidable choke point. Behind the wheel, looking terrified but resolute, was Ethan. He didn't look at me. He simply met the furious, murderous eyes of the goons and yelled, "I told you he wasn't going to fold. You should have taken the money." That was all the space I needed. I launched myself up the granite steps of the courthouse, the massive oak doors looming. I heard the muffled shouts of the 2 men, held up by the stalled truck and the rapidly gathering security guards. I reached the doors, my hand finding the cold brass of the push bar. I shoved. The doors swung inward, and I stumbled across the marble floor just as a deep, resonant chime echoed through the vast hall, the sound of the courthouse clock striking 5 p.m. I had missed it. Then a woman's voice, sharp and professional, cut through the silence. "Sir, the county recorder's office is still open. We operate on a digital timestamp. You have 60 seconds before the server locks." I had 30 feet to go. My brother, in his desperate attempt to save himself from a cabal of anonymous, century-old corporate vengeance, had inadvertently given me the one thing I desperately needed, the final, impossible window of opportunity. The clock chiming 5 p.m. was not the end, but the starting pistol for the final, agonizing sprint. I burst through the doors of the county recorder's office, my heart hammering against my ribs, the adrenaline masking the stinging pain in my legs and shoulder. The office was eerily quiet compared to the main hall, with fluorescent lights humming over stacks of files. A single clerk, a young woman with a weary expression, was preparing to close the window. "Please, I need to file this now," I gasped, shoving the heavy, oil-wrapped trust agreement and the vesting deed across the counter. The clock on the wall above her desk clearly read 5:1. She looked at me, then at the clock, then at the strange century-old documents. "Sir, we close at 5. The server locks." "I know. I was told the digital timestamp allows a small grace period. Please, it's a time-sensitive, century-old mineral rights vesting deed. It needs to be registered right now." My voice was raw with desperation. I didn't give her time to refuse. I pointed frantically at the document. "Account S. Hawthorne, please. Just scan the front page for the timestamp." She hesitated for a split second. Then, seeing the sheer panic in my eyes and the visible bruises on my face, she sighed and slid the document onto the flatbed scanner. The small digital clock in the corner of her computer screen read 5:05. She clicked the submit button for the digital record entry. We both watched the spinning hourglass icon on her screen. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The processing bar crept forward with agonizing slowness, a digital representation of my future hanging in the balance. At 5:19, the screen flashed green. Transaction complete. Document P190644 filed. The server had accepted the claim. The trust was vested. The gold mine was legally, irrevocably mine. I leaned against the counter, suddenly weak, the rush of relief nearly buckling my knees. The clerk, who had just witnessed the culmination of a 119-year legal time bomb, simply nodded, stamped my copy and said, "Have a good evening, sir. Try to come earlier next time." The threat for now had vanished. When I walked out of the courthouse, the granite steps were empty. The 2 black sedans were gone, along with the damaged pickup truck. The anonymous power had retreated into the shadows, their legal maneuver defeated by 19 seconds of server grace time and a desperate brother. They were powerful, but they weren't above the law, at least not this time. A few minutes later, a text arrived on my old phone, not the burner. It was a single, chilling message from an unknown number. "You won the battle of the calendar, Mark. Enjoy your brief ownership. The true worth of a claim is only realized when you try to dig." It was a warning that the legal battle was over, but the corporate war was just beginning. With the vesting deed secured, I immediately hired the best mining attorney I could find, one who specialized in historical mineral rights and corporate defense. Then, I flew in a discreet, independent geological engineer from out of state. Under the guise of an environmental survey, we revisited Silas's Folly, this time with sophisticated equipment. The quartz sample had not lied. The engineer's report was staggering. Silas's strike was not just a small, overlooked vein. It was a massive, high-grade deposit protected by an unusually thick cap of sediment. The initial estimates, factoring in current gold prices, placed the recoverable reserve at nearly $500 million, with the potential to push far higher. My $4,000 marshland was, in fact, an industrial-scale gold mine. But the story wasn't complete without Ethan. I found him 3 days later, holed up in a cheap hotel not far from the diner where he had first made the insulting offer. He looked wrecked, pale, and genuinely terrified. I sat across from him, not with anger, but with a complex sense of exhaustion and curiosity. "Why, Ethan? Why did you risk your life to block those men?" I asked, gesturing to the bruise on his face. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He finally confessed the full truth. The investment group, they are a fund composed of the descendants of the original Mid-Atlantic Syndicate's investors. They've been hunting this claim for decades. They came to me because they knew I was your brother. And I knew about the trust. My blood ran cold again. You knew? How? He slid a small, brittle envelope across the table. Inside was a handwritten letter, dated 1907, addressed to my son, Elias Hawthorne. Grandpa split the original estate documents. I inherited the family letters. You got the original land deed. This letter, it's from Silas to his son. It explains everything: the strike, the danger, and the exact legal maneuver he used with the vesting date to defeat the syndicate's heirs. I kept it, Mark. I always intended to leverage it, to sell the information for a massive fee when the time was right. I was going to use it to extort the group for more than the commission. He looked up, his eyes wet with a mixture of shame and relief. But when I saw those men ready to break your neck for the bag, I realized they would never stop. They would have killed you, taken the deed, and then come for me because I knew the secret. I blocked them because I was scared. But also, I knew the gold belonged to the family. Silas risked everything to keep it away from them. I couldn't let my greed be the reason the Hawthorne name lost its fortune. I saved you not just for myself, but for Silas. It was the only way I could redeem the fact that I almost sold our legacy for $50,000. I didn't offer a handshake or forgiveness, but a grudging understanding. He had committed a terrible sin, driven by ambition, but his final act had been one of perverse, self-serving loyalty. Today, Silas's Folly is no longer a marshy, forgotten plot. I'm preparing to develop the claim slowly, meticulously, protected by Silas's brilliant legal foresight. The gold is still there, millions upon millions of dollars of it, a fortune unlocked by a single defiant pinprick on a 1904 deed. I am a wealthy man now, but I sleep with the uncomfortable awareness that my life is permanently tangled with a powerful, relentless enemy. I have the mine, I have the money, but every time the phone rings from an unknown number, I am instantly reminded that the gold is merely the glittering prize in a silent, century-old war, a war that I have just inherited. The wealth is intoxicating, but the danger is the true price of great-great-grandpa Silas's strike.